Hello everyone. My name is Ankit Khare.
And my name is Ishika Sinha, and we are the host for today's EOD session, and our discussion will be around pre-budget session.
Today we are joined by Professor Vidhu Shekhar. He has recently been invited to a pre-budget consultation of economist with the finance minister. He has done his graduation from IIT Kharagpur, MBA and PhD from IIM Calcutta. He has 6 years of experience in financial service sector.
Welcome to today's session.
Thanks, Ishika. Good to be here.
So we're going to start with our first segment, which is more around how a budget is formed, so that anybody who is not able to understand and incorporate how a budget works would be able to get more understanding. So could you throw some light upon how a budget works and what are the key stakeholders that are involved?
Yes, sure. So, of course, the primary minister for handling this is the finance minister. One of the primary job of the finance minister is to have the budget up there. Within finance ministry, there is Department of Economic Affairs, DEA, which is the nodal department for creating the budget. But apart from that, they also have a budget committee or something of that sort, which typically consists of the top bureaucrats of the various departments of finance ministry. So you will have a revenue secretary over there, you would have the expenditure secretary over there, you would have the DPAM secretary, which is the disinvestment department, their secretary over there. And you have CA and maybe a couple of more people out there. So it is this committee which primarily handles the formation of the budget, revenue, handling the revenue part, expenditure, and the expenditure part. And the CA and the DEA being the primary coordinating agency which formulates the budget per se, and under the authority of finance minister. But of course, this has to go through the PMO as well. So PMO is as involved in it, but the primary responsibility lies with the finance minister, and that's how the budget gets created. Typical exercise for the budget, I think, starts 3 to 4 months prior to the budget. But I suspect, or in all priority, though, this would be a full year exercise. There would always be in the mind that the budget has to come, and accordingly, they would plan on to it. But the primary exercise, I think, starts somewhere around October or November when they start formally taking up the works on the budget. So that's how.
Sir, if you could tell us about, apart from tax slabs and headline numbers, what could be more things that a student should pay attention to in a budget?
Right. So, in recent times, the focus from budget has actually intentionally been decreased by the government, because we all know that there used to be a railway budget as well, which is now absorbed into this part. So that railway budget has been kind of done away with an additional sheet that comes over here. The aim of the government has typically been to reduce the budget to a primarily as a financial account statement and have policies through the year, not concentrated on the budget, which works better from the operational side as well. I mean, it's odd that you want to keep the policy for the end of the year to be produced, all policies for that. So in that sense, sensationalism or the star value of budget has come down, but of course, budget is budget, it won't go down. There are a few things which are extremely important to observe in the budget. The first number, of course, is the fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, essentially the difference between revenue and expenditure of the government per se. Its fiscal deficit is the amount of money that the government borrows, and thereby, because it's the amount of the money that the government borrows and thereby issues the bonds and stuff like that, fiscal deficit is the way in which government creates extra money at any point of time or in any year. The mechanism of printing money in the economy comes from the fiscal deficit part from the government side. There are other mechanisms of this as well, but the government fiscal deficit is one of the primary mechanisms of creating money. So very important number, what is the fiscal deficit out there? How much it should be, there is no science behind it. It should not be too large, it should not be disruptive. And there are norms globally that you follow depending on times. Again, so we had COVID, and that point of time we had a comparatively higher fiscal deficit because it was required to handle the situation and all that. So no benchmark of what fiscal deficit should be, but it should not be too large. It should not be too disruptive as well. So it should not be volatile as well. It should have maintained. So that is one. Apart from fiscal deficit number, another number, key number to watch out is, I would say, the capex number. What is the capex that is happening by the government? Also, the capex to the revenue ratio. So the revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure is the operational expenditure you do on day-to-day expenses, salaries paid and pensions paid and all those stuff goes into the revenue expenditure, right? They are expenses. While capital expenditure is the investment side of it. The ratio of how much you are investing versus how much are you spending on your expenses is an important number to go by. So that's another key number that has to be looked at for. And of course, people focus on tax slabs because that has got a material impact directly on the populace per se, especially the income tax paying one. We now have a GST council which determines the larger GST rates and stuff like that. So that's not technically part of the budget per se. So of course, the GST numbers would be reflected over there. That has been taken away from that. So primarily these are the numbers that one should look for. The budget has also increasingly started focusing on specific sectors more and more and more. So sectorial numbers, which is the sector being focused to, MSME numbers, what is the benefits that the government is giving to MSMEs, are other ancillary numbers that we can look for in the budget.
So you talked about constraints like fiscal deficit, inflation, and the requirement for growth. Like government is focusing on the year-round policies. So how much flexibility do you think the finance minister has over the budget?
Okay, so actually the right way to ask is how much flexibility the government has on the budget rather than finance ministry particularly, because at the end it's a government exercise. So I suspect PMO would have a very strong role in the play, and he should have. Because at the end, he is the executive that is handling the overall government mechanisms. They have fair flexibility of switching money from here to there. There is no doubt about it. They need to watch the fiscal deficit. So the revenue that they are generating, that gives them a leeway. So any increase in revenue gives them a leeway. Any decrease in cost gives them a leeway. But the final leeway comes is that how much of your cost can be higher than your revenue, which is the fiscal deficit, and that is the number which is very closely watched. The overall numbers of the budget, the flexibility decreases. It's not that government cannot have higher fiscal deficits and stuff like that, just that there are repercussions of having that. So even if you are having higher fiscal deficit, you need to be very careful of where you are spending that money, right? So some flexibility there, not very high flexibility, especially with fiscal responsibility, and there has been an act on that as well, RBM Act and stuff like that. What real flexibility they have is within the numbers itself. That is a very high flexibility that government can prioritize as per their own wishes. For example, prior to 2014, the tendency to control fiscal deficit was by cutting the capex out there. So any decrease, any issues in revenue or any increase in cost, where you cut the capex, right? So you cut the long-term investments. It's like a company cutting out its R&D expenses or long-term investment per se. So the impact would not be immediate, but long-term it can be a big issue. Long-term it can lead to even revenue crash and so on and so forth, right? Versus the current government has typically been very strong on capital expenditure, very focused on capital expenditure, right? So they have increased capex ratio as a percent of GDP. They have almost doubled it. I think it was 1.6 or 1.7% prior to 2014, and now it would be around 3.7, 3.8% of the GDP in terms of capital expenditure. So this switch ability is entirely in government hand. Where do you want to focus the EA? Small amounts, very high flexibility. So 100 crore, 200 crore, 1000 crore, 5000 crore, they can allocate to various things. They have got enough leeway on that side. They also get some flexibility by looking at last year's budget rate where they have allotted how much of it was used, how much of remaining was there, which gives them a clue that I can cut the budget on this line item because either it was not used and put the money somewhere. They can do that. So within budget, apart from the broader ones where they have flexibility, but that has to be closely watched, internal flexibility is decently high for them. Where to focus, where not to focus, and stuff.
So looking back at last year's budget, what do you say like most significant achievements or drawbacks has been, and based on the economic standpoint?
Yeah. I wouldn't say there has been any significant drawbacks. If at all, there could be missed opportunities. We can probably think about that. But if you look at, of course, the income tax was in news, and this time also with the rumors are doing that there can be even more innovation in the income tax slabs per se. And high time. I think we can have a modern income tax slabbing which is in line with the global standards and stuff like that. So beyond income tax, and probably income tax was given because in the year prior to that there was quite a lot of furor related to some changes that income tax slabs, income tax had seen. So probably that was a response to that. But I suspect, so that was the largest talked about item in the last year budget. Apart from that, fiscal deficit was very well maintained. Very happy with that. The points given for, there were enough allocations, small allocations, small compared to the budget line. It was not small in the general mark. So decent allocations to education, decent allocations to credit guarantee of MSMEs. There was a focus on that as well. Good allocation to various industries. Agri had a very good allocation. Education also had a good allocation with skilling schemes out there. So overall, I found it a decent budget with no particular star beyond the income tax side. But that's a good. That's the aim of the government itself. Keeps on announcing the policy, but not keep too many things for the budget per se. So a controlled fiscal deficit with income tax cut and sectoral focuses on specific sectors, including cutting edge sectors like AI, was what we can call last year budget was good at.
Got it, sir. Moving on from previous year's budget, we can deep dive more into the current economic scenario of the government and how the setup works. So if we could have more around the current economic model of government,
right.
Throw some light on that.
Yeah. So budget, of course, is a reflection. Budget, the way you spend, how you spend, is the reflection for what is the economic thinking that the government itself has, right? And of course, it doesn't verbalize it, but you can summarize it looking at the policies and things that they have been doing over a period of time, right? So what I feel is one markedly different aspect of the current government is that it is well focused on both the production part, the generation part, and the distribution part per se, right? So economy has to generate, of course, that's the main purpose of the economy, is to generate wealth for the country. The other aspect, which is probably not part of the economy, but probably more part of what government should do, is distribution of that wealth. That should take place as well on a continuing basis. Because, and there has been research around this, that mathematically, any system which is based on competition would generate inequality on its own. There is no other way. There's competitions, there will be people who will keep on winning, right? So automatically inequality seeps. So a capitalistic kind of a method for production, which has proven very good for production purposes, for generation purposes, we see the amount of innovation and the amount of industries that have come up because thanks to capitalism per se, which is a competitive allocation of capital, competitive allocation of industry. Very, very good at generation, but it has been inherently unequal in that sense. Right? On the other hand, the traditionally post-independence, a lot of focus of India has been on socialistic welfare measures. Right? We have a history of that, and there are reasons for it and stuff like that. That's a separate talk point. But traditionally, India has had a very strong focus on welfare. But the problem is that you can do welfare only if you have enough money to do it, right? So, bottom line being that over the years, Indian government has struggled between doing more generation or doing more distribution of social welfare and stuff like that. And wherever there has been an imbalance into it, it was reflected into fall of the government, breaking away of inflation and stuff like that. Right? So, for example, we had P.V. Narasimha Rao, who did a great reforms in the economy, but he didn't increase any welfare particularly, right? And because of various reasons, the inflation was also high. So inflation is high, you're not doing welfare, you're bound to be kicked out of the government. This is what happened. Despite whatever the great reforms he brought in, his government didn't return. Similar with Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, right? We had a slew of reforms, slew of disinvestment, a lot of focus on infrastructure, there was volume collateral and stuff like that. But they cut down on the subsidy. In fact, kerosene subsidy is something that they really cut down on. And Yashwant Sinha, who was the finance minister at that point of time, particularly noted in his interview that when I used to go to villages to ask for vote, they would say that Baki sab to theek hai, पर आपके कारण मेरा चूल्हा बंद हुआ, which is kerosene came down from 2 rupees to 9 rupees. It's a big impact, and it impacts everybody. So one-on-one impact हो जाता है, right? So if I'm putting a vote and मेरा तेल का भाव ऊपर खाने पीने का भाव बढ़ गया है, of course not inclined to vote for them. Right? And that along with other political measures, I suspect why he didn't return. So his focus was too much on production, less and even negative on social welfare, and that did bite him back. And the learning from there for the Manmohan Singh government, the UPA government, was that go berserk on welfare, which worked in the first term, right? So they did a lot of loan waivers, they did Manrega and related social welfare measures, and we saw they returned really good in 2009, right? But they did not focus at all on generating wealth, right? In fact, they suffered from policy paralysis, the promise of infrastructure that was there. I remember 2007-8, people used to talk so much about new infrastructure coming in and stuff like that. All that promise got wasted by the time it was UPA 2. So they didn't do any capital investment or capital expenditure which would aid in generating wealth itself. And they continue doing social welfare. So what happens when you distribute money without generating money? The inflation is a natural outcome, right? Which is what happened in UPA 2. And because of this balance again, say it was anti-corruption movement, but corruption is no new news in India, right? Corruption is there always, right? But it was the anger of the day-to-day situation of people which got translated via corruption. So even more if you are suffering budget issues in your house and then you see news of thousands of crores of corruption coming, your anger boils over, right? So my reading is that it was largely the berserk inflation that was there, no policy policies without generating and stuff like that, generally translated into the anger which finally led to the decline of UPA, right? And in this measure, I must praise the current government that since 2014, their focus is equally good on both. That's why what I call it as a capitalistic socialism model of economy, which I think this government has been following. Why capitalistic first and socialism next? Because first you have to generate wealth to distribute it. And they have focused on this well. Though truly speaking, in this first term, the star things that it did, the current government did was welfare schemes only. So you had a host of welfare schemes that work out. But if you see over a period of time, the focus is as much on welfare as it is on industry, infrastructure, road building, capital expenditure is also very high. PLI schemes are there is sectoral focus out there. So the focus is equally distributed between generation and distribution both. This balance, I suspect, is what is leading to having very, very low inflation, controlled fiscal deficit, and yet delivering on all parameters. And the government is being re-elected again and again and again. Right? So yeah, that is the philosophy I believe the current government is following. Capitalistic socialism.
Okay, got it, sir. Moving our discussion towards the shaping of this year's budget. The government have been focusing more towards deregulation and decriminalization, and considering in fact the global factors that are involved in key making of a budget, we could discuss, if you could throw some light upon discussing more around what could be the policy changes or what could be the expectation towards this year's budget 2026.
Right. So Indian state has the leftover impressions of a police state, and stuff like that. So if you look at the way the laws have been made and the way the laws have been maintained over a period of time, they are geared towards more criminalization and more stringent rules for even the minor of the misdemeanors are there, right? In that scenario, of course, it's good that they didn't get implemented on the road that much, right? So if today a state wants to, given the current set of laws, state wants to put you in jail, they can put you in jail. It's that bad a situation out there. Good parties, they don't. So the police, they understand that you cannot, whatever the rules they speak, they are there for certain purposes, but you cannot implement them that strongly. This is the state of the overall rules and regulations, and of course there has been reform. We have moved from IPC to BNS and stuff like that. But that reforms is also required in financial laws and regulations and stuff like that, right? So rationalization of them, and what has also happened that for a long period of time, if you let bureaucracy be, what they tend on doing is they keep on generating rules and rules and rules without removing the old rules. So it's rules over rules over rules over So every new addition that they have to do, they do some tweak in the every exception that they see, they add another tweak, and that way it gets voluminous, right? And more voluminous it is, more leeway they have to catch you, right? So in that sense, rationalization of rules and regulations, financial rules and regulations, is absolutely required for ease of doing business. The problem is that you cannot do it at a one go kind of thing, because you don't know what repercussions of what will happen. If a situation is too complicated, there's a difference between complex and complicated. Complex is a complex setup kind of a thing. A complicated is, so the difference is a well-arranged wire stack versus a messy wire stack. A messy wire stack is complicated, you don't know what is it. A complex setup is, it's well, and there are too many wires, it's well, and you know what wire, where, stuff. So the situation of India is complicated, rules and regulations. And therein, if you somehow take out one rule, what repercussions it can have down the line, what repercussions primarily on the revenue it can have, we don't know. Right? So therefore, it cannot be done in one go, but the government has been doing it stepwise. And I like that in each budget, certain rationalization comes in, right? And I suspect this budget also, they would have enough rationalization. The pressure has increased for rationalization, ease of doing business further, because we are geopolitical, there is tariff issues and stuff like that, right? So what happens because of tariff, the primary impact of tariff is losing of competitive edge. The moment there is tariff, that's an extra competitive edge that you lose because of the pricing that you have to increase and stuff like that, right? So how to counter that? There are various ways of doing it. One is probably depreciation of the currency, devaluation of the currency itself, which has happened. We have devalued to a decent extent. The moment it devalues, it takes away edge of the tariff. Cheaper rupee, now you are better at exporting, right? The other is aid the industry with cheaper capital as well, which is also happening. Rate cuts have been there. The third is decrease the cost of compliance that is required for the companies to come up. So decrease their cost of function, which is the ease of doing business part of it, and which is perhaps what would have a stronger focus in this budget. I suspect because of tariff issues, they will try and be as friendly as possible for the industries to function. Right? So, Indian bureaucracy has got its own issues, but from experience, in crisis they deliver well. So I suspect, and perhaps they always think that crisis is a chance to reform themselves as well. Everybody gets aligned. So I suspect it's not really crisis in that sense, but the tariff threat would work in making them function better in terms of rationalizing the rules that already exist.
Yeah. Yes. So in line with this tariff, there is a whole loop that is attached with tariff and the current US situations and how that is all linking with India. Currently, Nirmala Sitharaman made a statement in the EBG group that they are moving towards simplification of custom taxation. And in this budget put forward, that will be more visible towards it. So if you could have a discussion.
Yeah, so again, customs is in Bihar and stuff, you will find now it has become more modern situations. I wouldn't say it's there now. But go a little back, you will see that the custom officers are in high demand in the marriage market of Bihar. So we all know the reasons why. Customs has got this reputation of being a place where a lot of dealings can take place. But this is nothing new. The customs issue is not just Indian as well. Custom is a border issue, and because there is a lot of discussion of what they are doing and stuff like that, corruption at the border is a historical issue across the world. It's not just in India, and it has been known. Custom officers at various point of time, किसको I don't know क्या import कर रहे हो, I don't know तुम लेते जाओ. Very high discussion that they have. या तुम क्या कर रहे हो? I will go down and open all the nails and see कि ये कौन सा kind of nail है, इस पे मैं custom डाल सकता हूँ कि नहीं, stuff like that, things like that, right? So the custom issue is a complex issue and has been across the world. That's not a reason why India should reform it per se. So it should have been reformed earlier. Yes, of course, no doubt about it. But again, tariff time, good time for handling such kind of a crisis and import-export. The more A's of business you put over there, it becomes easier and easier on that side. So in that sense, easier. So customs, how can it aid it? So let's say you import something, make something, and then send it out, right? So in that customs duties, if they are rationalized well, that would help businesses in doing well per se or doing better in that sense. So So yes, I suspect there was an issue of customs that a couple of importers highlighted last year to the FM directly, which was resolved. But I think that was also a signal of what some amount of custom reforms that should come in process. I very well suspect they would have something related to rationalizations of customs in the country.
So, given that India is a well-connected economy and globalization, so how there are always so many events happening in the global world. How does the finance minister, the government, or the young generation filter out these events and try to understand what makes the government, like what policies, like how the government decides what to actually listen to and decide their policies based on?
Right. So the budget, the main thing the government will always look for is its revenue getting impacted, is the cost escalating or not escalating, right? So these are critical things. So, for example, tariff could be a critical thing, right? Because it can have issues on import and exports, which can have repercussions on BOPs and stuff, which not directly translates to budget, but in the overall scheme of things, complicates the overall economic situation. So then, accordingly, you have to act, right? But more and more increasingly connected world, one of the issues of this world is that both in terms of the news velocity, in terms of the fast capital movement. So the movement of capital across the globe has increased a lot, right? Which means that if you err anywhere in your budget, for let's say I loosen a fiscal deficit a bit, the repercussions are felt immediately. So the power of global bond holders and capital holders has increased over a period of time. It might go down. There is a financial crisis and stuff like that, but that has increased, which makes this exercise more sensitive to the global scenario per se. So that's one aspect. Capital flow, we don't want Indian yields, which is the Indian borrowing capacity, to go down and stuff like that. So you have to maintain budget according to that and stuff like that. But beyond that, the globe also shapes the budget of the country in terms of, so I keep saying this to my students, that geopolitics and geoeconomics are not two different things, right? A lot of times one drives the other and so on and so forth, right? So a lot of the times what expense you should do and you must do is shaped by how the world is sitting, where it is going and stuff like that. And in that sense, where the world is sitting per se, so I suspect the global uncertainty is at an all-time high, economic uncertainty as well as geopolitical uncertainty. It's an all-time high, not just because of tariffs and the way US has been behaving all over the place, some bright idea every 15 days and stuff like that, but also because the economic situation globally is not at a good place, right? So we already know that Europe has had economic issues since 2008 prior. US has also been ups and down in the economy since 2008 again. Japan has went bad long ago. The global growth engine used to be China, but since last 4 or 5 years, you will see it has gone through its own debt issues, and we had Evergrande default and stuff like that. So bottom line is that globally the economic situation is very bad. Almost all countries have exhausted most of the growth revenues presented to them. China has been trying to push consumption for last number of years. I don't know, 10 years they have been trying. Nothing has come out of it. Manufacturing, they have done so much of manufacturing capacity that in some sectors China has got capacity to produce more than the world demanded. Solar panel, they can produce more than that. Essentially means that they can't even spend more on the capacity expansion. That is also exhausted. Right? Their factories are running at 60%, 50%, and if there is a trade war, that will further excess capacity within China. China may excess capacity is there and people are not consuming. What will you do? Factories, even if they are factories, will not function only and stuff like that, right? So good chunk real estate of China and real estate of US have already seen their peak and have gone after that, right? So good chunk of the global economies have exhausted all possible sectors which they could perhaps activate and push and get the growth out of. Which means that this is actually a very, very scary scenario, because if there are no avenues to grow, then how do you grow? So the last avenue of growth that finally remains when all other sectors are exhausted is military economy and military, right? So if you can't push any sector, then what sector you can still push? You can push the military sector. How and why? Because military is one sector where the producer and the consumer both is the government. So it can put up factories for producing, and it can buy its own produce as well, in the process generate the economic activity and economic growth that is required. Right? So this is known as military Keynesianism. Yeah. Military Keynesianism. Right? Which is essentially pumping up the economy via military expenses, which I suspect is something that has gripped the world now. Right? So for those expenses, if you have to incur military expenses, what do you need? You need small conflicts in the world. You need a higher tension in geopolitics so that you can possibly justify the spend that you are making, which I suspect is what we are seeing. We are seeing scenarios where out of the blue conflicts are coming up. There could be other reasons for it, but I think the underlying of all this thing is that economic growth of the world over is exhausted, and countries have started moving towards a place where they can spend on military and grow the economy. Even Europe has started. People say US has withdrawn the security cover. They have started spending because perhaps there's a larger design that the want was that they should spend in military so that the economic growth. So I am withdrawing my security cover. Right? Japan security cover has not been withdrawn. But Japan I think for the first time post World War II, definitely after a lot of decades is now doing large military spends out there. Right? This military spend is now at all-time peak or something for at least a couple of decades. China, of course, we all know. China military, US Cold War, emerging Cold War kind of a thing, militarizing over there, right? So whole of the globe is now involved in this, right? Implications for India is that if the world is militarizing, you cannot stand behind it. Especially with the volatile levels that we have. But the good part is that India is not at a stage where its growth sectors are exhausted. India's growth sectors are very well and doing extremely well, which means that military expenses, military consumption would only benefit along with the regular growth. So it can actually produce a lot of benefits beyond the regular growth that India perhaps would have had this not been there, right? So yes, the quality of spend, where do you put the spend? And likely we should see increased military expenditure in this budget as well. There is a very, very high chance we would see that, right? Or at least better utilization of the money that is already located out there. Right? So yeah, that's overall of how geopolitics kind of shapes the line items where you spend your money.
Given the volatile world right now, every country is militarizing. So India is a country which has fiscal deficit. Government is running a fiscal deficit, and we have less savings than what we consume. So we also have a current account deficit. Given this scenario, can India afford to increase their expenditure on defense, which will not lead to any future revenues, like if we spend that money on capex?
Right. So fiscal deficit actually is controlled in India, and government technically is like a bank where they are bound to have some amount of fiscal deficit. Not that big a trouble. But you are correct. The question could be that at the economic stage that we are in, how much of military expenditure should we be able to afford or not afford, right? So that's a subjective call, but one thing I must add is that military expenditure can and probably is more often than not very, very good source of science and innovation. Right? So if you look at the history of military expenditure in the US, a whole host of innovations, whole encryptions, everything that you see today, whatever encrypted messages that you see, that came from a military expenditure of US during World War II era, right? Of course, nuclear weapons also came from there, so this power also probably came from there only. Not just that, even in peacetime, you see all this internet came from DARPA, right? So that was a military project that from which internet came into existence itself, right? Whole of the activities of Elon Musk is financed by the US Department of Defense. It's entirely financial kind of innovation that he is doing. Right? What are the benefits of that? That's a separate matter in that sense. But the point I'm trying to say is that science and innovation a lot of the times require kind of a funding where you just give the money and forget about the money, right? And it's quite possible that the 90% of that money might go to waste. But it's that 10% which leads to entirely new financial, scientific innovations which can have a economy-wide repercussions. Right? So military expenditure is not necessarily only for war. It is. You have to put up your missiles and guns and stuff like that. But a lot of time military expenditure can also leads to great many innovations as well. Right? It's one of the very good measures of doing that. So there are benefits beyond that. But mostly I think the kind of scenario that the world is going through, where the world has decided that they have to pump up the economy while doing military expenditure, India has no option but to respect. The idea is that the quality of spend should be high, which I hope would be the case. So,
Yes, so moving towards closing this session, if you could name few sectors that you think that this budget would be more focused on and the upcoming budget will throw more light towards it, what do you think would be the sectors?
Right. So it's not really sector, but in some sense it is a kind of a segment per se. So one focus is of course going to be there, MSMEs would be there. The focus on MSMEs is going to be there. MSMEs are backbone for employment. MSMEs are also backbone, if done well, backbone for innovation at a base level kind of a scenario. MSMEs are also backbone, can also become backbone for exports as well. Right? So we would definitely see a strong focus on MSME, and doing in a lot of areas of business actually should be geared towards them. I suspect the credit guarantees and the fund availability, I think already SIDBI has some announcement has been made already on budget as well. But their credit guarantees would see an expansion as well. So the support to MSME would definitely see an expansion. In all likelihood see an expansion. Right. Apart from that, focus on agri also I suspect would be there. I am not sure if there is anything lined up for disinvestment. Insurance already saw increasing of 100% FDI policy came into the picture last year itself. So I don't think so that's going to be much material on that side. MSME, agri, overall PLI schemes are there either way through the sector. So that specific sectors schemes depending on what has been proposed by various industry bodies and stuff like that. That should come into the picture. Military is going to be a focus area, no doubt about it. Education will also see some, I suspect will see, that has been traditionally something that the government has been doing for a long period of time. So they should see some activity over in the education bit. Last budget also carried some few things over here. We had, the Prime Minister had a meeting with all the industrialists saying that we should go big on AI, don't do small things in AI and stuff like that. So I suspect even on that side you should see some activity, but this is the sunrise sector, this is the initial sector. There's only so much of thing you can do by just putting in money. There's a limit of what money you can put and do it. So, but the focus will be there on cutting edge tech as well. So probably, yeah, this is what it is in terms of sector. On the welfare side also, I suspect they would have good view on efficiency. So increasing the efficiency of welfare further to the extent possible. Because the style of the government has been that increase the efficiency as much as possible, so that each rupee bank is higher for the welfare, so that you deliver more and more welfare while not actually increasing the overall budget. That focus has consistently been for the government, so I suspect this budget also they should see some better efficiency measures for the welfare schemes too.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. And this was really an insightful session. And I'm pretty sure that all of us got to learn a lot and got really good insights about how the budget works, how the upcoming budget would be, and how to draw parallels between previous budgets and how to take out the noise from it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.